Claire realized the house felt too quiet for a Friday night. The realization settled over her like a chill she couldn't quite name. Slipping between the familiar rhythms of her suburban Oregon home, the TV played a familiar sitcom, one she had half-watched a dozen times before, the kind with canned laughter that usually blended into the background. Tonight, however, it felt louder than usual, as if the show was desperately trying to fill a space that had grown too wide, too hollow. Outside, rain slid down the windows in steady silver streaks. It was the kind of Pacific Northwest drizzle that locals stopped noticing years ago, the sort that turned streets into mirrors and made the world feel softer at the edges. But inside, the quiet pressed against her skin. Claire sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath a soft gray blanket, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The fabric of the couch felt warmer than it should have, absorbing the heat from her body, and the faint warmth radiating from the man beside her. Ethan had arrived an hour earlier with takeout Thai food, and that easy, familiar smile of his, the kind that never demanded anything in return. He always showed up like that, helpful, calm, reliable. No grand gestures, no pressure, just presence. After her marriage had quietly dissolved 3 years ago, Ethan had drifted into her life naturally, like a friend who became something more undefined. They didn't call it dating, they called it comfort. Takeout on Fridays, movies on rainy weekends, the occasional deep conversation that skirted around anything too vulnerable. She laughed when the studio audience laughed, even though her mind was miles away. The sound felt mechanical, forced. She was thinking about how strange it was to share silence with someone and still feel profoundly alone. Loneliness, she had learned, didn't always vanish just because another body occupied the same room. It could linger, patient and heavy, waiting for moments like this. Ethan stretched his long legs out in front of him, settling deeper into the cushions. He smelled faintly of rain and clean soap, with a hint of the cedarwood cologne he wore on casual nights. Nothing about him was dramatic or overwhelming. He wasn't the type to sweep a woman off her feet with grand romance or intense passion. He was steady, the kind of man people trusted instinctively, without overthinking it. That steadiness had always been part of his appeal. And Claire realized with a quiet pang, part of the problem. In a world that felt increasingly chaotic, his calmness was magnetic. Yet it also made the growing tension between them harder to ignore. She shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "I'm just tired," she told herself. It had been a long week at the marketing firm where she worked. Endless emails, tight deadlines, and the low hum of office politics that drained her more than she admitted. Sleep had been elusive lately, her mind replaying fragments of her past marriage like a loop she couldn't pause. These were normal things, normal Friday night feelings, nothing more. Then Ethan leaned forward to grab the remote from the coffee table. It was a small, casual movement, barely noticeable in the dim glow of the television. When he sat back, however, his arm rested lower along the couch cushion than before. His hand brushed against her side, just for a moment. Light and seemingly uncertain. The contact was fleeting, the barest graze of fingers against the fabric of her sweater, yet it sent a spark of awareness racing through her. Her heart skipped, breath catching in her throat. She waited for him to pull away. She waited for the awkward laugh, the mumbled apology, the quick retreat that would reset everything to safe, familiar territory. None of that came. Ethan's hand stayed where it was, not pressing, not exploring, just resting, still enough to suggest hesitation, close enough to feel intentional. His eyes remained fixed on the screen, but his jaw tightened visibly, his posture suddenly rigid, as if he too was hyper-aware of the line they had just skirted. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken questions. Claire's mind raced. This is a mistake. This is crossing a line. I should stop this immediately. She had built her life on doing the right thing. Even when it hurt, boundaries mattered. Respect mattered, yet her body remained still, caught between instinct and a deeper, more dangerous emotion. She stared straight ahead, the flickering TV lights reflecting in her wide eyes. Her hands clenched tightly together in her lap. Memories flooded in without warning. Nights spent eating dinner alone at this very coffee table. The clink of her fork against the plate echoing in the empty house. Mornings waking up to silence instead of the familiar rustle of someone else getting ready for the day. The slow, painful realization that her marriage hadn't ended in a dramatic fight or betrayal. It had simply faded day by day, conversation by conversation, until there was nothing left to hold on to. She had told herself she was fine. Afterward, independent, strong, capable, but strength didn't erase the quiet ache of being unseen, of going through life without someone who truly noticed the small things. Ethan shifted slightly beside her, as if only now fully registering what his body had done. His fingers tensed, then relaxed again. Still, he didn't move away. The room felt smaller, the walls closer, the rain outside a distant murmur. The laughter from the TV sounded fake and far away, belonging to another world entirely. Claire's heart pounded so forcefully, she was certain he could hear it. This wasn't the sweeping romance of movies or novels. This was quieter, more perilous. It was the comfort of not pulling back, of allowing a single touch to linger in the space where words failed. She told herself it meant nothing. People misjudged personal space all the time. Accidents happened in close quarters. If she moved now, everything would reset. They could laugh it off, finish the episode, and end the night as planned. But moving would mean admitting something had shifted. Staying still meant admitting something else. Entirely something she wasn't ready to name. Minutes stretched. The show continued, scenes blurring together unnoticed. Time folded in on itself. Claire felt suspended between who she had been, the careful, rule-following woman who had rebuilt her life, brick by brick, and whoever she was becoming in this charged, uncertain moment. She wasn't reckless. She followed boundaries. She respected the invisible lines that kept life orderly. Yet tonight, doing nothing felt easier, more honest than pulling away. Her thoughts turned sharp and inward. Is this loneliness speaking? A need for closeness I've ignored for too long? Or is it simply human weakness? The kind everyone pretends doesn't exist. She had spent years convincing herself she was whole on her own. Therapy brochures sat untouched on her desk. Friends offered well-meaning advice about putting herself out there. But here, with Ethan's hand resting so close, the ache felt undeniable. Finally, Ethan moved. His hand pulled back slowly, reluctantly, as if moving through deep water. The contact ended so gently it almost felt imagined. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring down at the floor. The space between them suddenly felt louder than the touch itself. Claire released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The exhale trembled slightly. I'm sorry, Ethan started, his voice low and careful. He rubbed his hands together, the calm exterior cracking to reveal nerves underneath. I didn't. That wasn't. It's okay, Claire said automatically, nodding without looking at him. The words felt practiced, safe. She wasn't sure they were true. The episode ended. The screen faded to black, credits rolling in silence. The sudden quiet pressed down on them both. Claire stood up quickly, needing distance, needing air. Her legs felt unsteady. I'm going to get some water, she murmured, already moving toward the kitchen. Ethan stood too, grabbing his jacket from the nearby chair. Yeah, I should probably head out. They moved through the familiar routine, gathering leftovers, turning off lights, avoiding each other's eyes. Both pretended this was just another ordinary ending to an ordinary evening, but the air crackled with everything unsaid. At the front door, Ethan hesitated, his hand on the handle as if it suddenly weighed 100 pounds. He turned back, searching her face for permission, forgiveness, or clarity. Claire offered none. Her expression remained carefully neutral, though her pulse still raced. Good night, he said finally, voice soft. Good night. The door closed softly behind him. Claire stood alone in the living room, the echo of the moment lingering like perfume. She sank back onto the couch, staring at the empty space beside her. The blanket still held the faint impression of where he had sat. Her thoughts raced in circles. Nothing happened. Not really. And yet, something had begun. A crack in the careful walls she had built. A question she could no longer ignore. She stayed there for a long time, listening to the rain, replaying every second of that brief electric contact. By the time she finally went to bed, the house felt quieter than ever. By morning, Claire knew the night before hadn't been a dream. The knowledge hit harder than the strong black coffee she held in her hands. Sunlight crept through the kitchen window of her suburban Oregon home, soft and golden, landing on the same wooden table where Ethan had eaten dinner so many times before. Everything looked normal, unchanged. The rain from last night had stopped, leaving the world outside glistening and fresh. Yet Claire felt off balance, as if the floor had tilted while she slept. She stood there longer than necessary, staring at nothing, replaying that single moment on the couch again and again. The brief touch, the heavy silence, the way neither of them had pulled away. She went through her morning routine on autopilot, showering, choosing a simple blouse and slacks for work, brushing her hair until it fell in familiar waves. In the mirror, her reflection looked the same, mid-30s, clear eyes, the faint lines of someone who had learned to smile through uncertainty. But inside something had shifted, a quiet crack in the foundation she had worked so hard to rebuild after her divorce. Work moved fast, as it always did in America, where people rarely paused long enough to notice the quiet fractures forming beneath the surface. At the marketing firm downtown, Claire answered emails, joined Zoom meetings, and smiled at coworkers in the break room. She laughed at a joke about the weekend weather, nodded through a strategy discussion for a new client campaign, and typed up reports with mechanical efficiency. No one noticed that her mind kept drifting back to the couch, to the empty space beside her that now felt strangely louder than Ethan's actual presence had. Ethan didn't text. That silence felt heavier than any words could have been. By afternoon, Claire told herself she was being dramatic. Adults had awkward moments all the time. A misplaced hand, a moment of weakness. It didn't have to mean anything. She could let it fade. She could pretend it never happened. But pretending had never fixed anything in her life before. Her marriage had ended in layers of unspoken pretenses, and she refused to repeat that pattern. That evening, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was reheating leftovers. The screen lit up with his name. Ethan, can we talk? She stared at the message longer than necessary, thumb hovering. Her first instinct was to say she was busy. Her second was to ignore it completely. Instead, she typed back one word. Claire, okay. They met at a small coffee shop downtown. The next day, the kind with soft, indie music playing in the background, worn wooden tables, and the comforting aroma of freshly ground beans. Neutral ground, public, safe. Claire arrived early and chose a seat near the window, watching pedestrians pass outside, couples laughing, strangers brushing shoulders, everyone carrying invisible stories. She wrapped her hands around a warm latte, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her chest. Ethan walked in 10 minutes later. He looked tired, not messy or dramatic, just quieter than usual, like someone who hadn't slept well. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual easy smile was absent. They didn't hug. They simply sat across from each other, hands wrapped around their cups, eyes meeting briefly before drifting away. I didn't mean to put you in that position, Ethan said first. His voice was steady, but his shoulders were tense, fingers tapping lightly against the side of his mug. I should have been more careful. It was out of line. Claire nodded slowly. I know. There was a pause, not awkward but thoughtful, weighted with mutual understanding. I didn't stop it, she said softly, surprising herself with the admission. That matters too. I need to be honest about that. Ethan looked up, genuine surprise flickering across his face. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, as if releasing a breath he'd been holding for hours. I kept thinking about that, about how neither of us moved. They didn't rush the conversation. They talked like adults who understood consequences, who had lived enough life to know that actions, even small ones, carried ripples. They spoke about boundaries, about timing, about how closeness could sneak up on people when loneliness had lasted too long. Neither blamed the other, and that honesty made everything harder. There was no villain in this story, only two people navigating the gray space between friendship and something more. Over the next few weeks, they tried distance. Fewer texts, no casual drop-ins, no more movie nights on her couch. Claire filled her evenings with long walks through neighborhood parks, phone calls to old friends, and the steady noise of podcasts to drown out her thoughts. Ethan respected the space, even when it clearly cost him. He threw himself into work projects and weekend hikes, the kind that left him exhausted, but clear-headed. But absence doesn't always erase feelings. Sometimes it sharpens them, like a blade against stone. The quiet moments became louder. Claire found herself noticing the empty passenger seat in her car, the second coffee mug she still washed out of habit. Ethan later admitted he drove past her street more than once, only to keep going. When they finally saw each other again, it was at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue on a warm American summer afternoon. Music played from a portable speaker, kids ran around with sticky fingers and paper plates, and people laughed about nothing important. The air smelled of grilled burgers, fresh corn, and sunscreen. Claire felt, Ethan's presence before she saw him, some invisible pull that made her turn her head. Just as he stepped through the gate, they exchanged polite smiles, safe smiles, the kind people use when pretending feels easier than explaining. But every glance carried memory. Every shared laugh felt loaded with subtext. Later, as the sun dipped low and conversations softened into evening hues of orange and pink, they found themselves standing near the wooden fence, separated from the group by just enough space to breathe. "I miss talking to you," Ethan said quietly, hands in his pockets. Claire didn't answer right away. She watched the sky change colors, the way light painted the clouds. "I miss feeling understood," she replied eventually. It was the truest thing she had said in months. They walked to their cars together afterward. No touching, no rushing, just steps in sync, the gravel crunching beneath their shoes. "I don't want to cross lines," Ethan told her at the edge of the parking area. "But I also don't want to lie about how I feel." Claire looked at him, really looked this time. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't pushing. He was simply offering honesty and waiting for her to decide what to do with it. "I need time," she said. "I know." They parted with more clarity than before, but clarity didn't bring peace. It brought questions that followed her home. Months passed. Fall arrived with its crisp air and changing leaves, fiery reds, burnt oranges and golds that blanketed the sidewalks. Life kept moving forward, relentless as ever. Claire started therapy, something she had delayed for years. In a cozy office with a kind counselor named Margaret, she unpacked her marriage, her lingering loneliness, and her deep fear of wanting something new too late in life. She learned that longing wasn't weakness. She learned that stillness could be a choice, but so could movement. Session by session, she began to understand the difference between fear and readiness. One evening in November, as gray skies hung low and the first hints of winter chill settled in, Claire invited Ethan over again. Not casually this time, intentionally. She set out tea instead of takeout, and they sat in opposite chairs in the living room, the couch deliberately untouched. The space felt different now, charged with intention rather than accident. "The rules were clear," Claire said calmly, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting inside her. "I don't regret that night, but I don't want to live in half steps anymore." Ethan listened without interrupting, his eyes attentive. The man who had once been simply comfort now sat before her as someone fully seen. "I want something honest," she continued. "Even if it's hard, even if it doesn't last. I'm tired of pretending the space next to me isn't empty. I'm tired of being strong in silence." They talked for hours that night, about what they both wanted, about the risks of changing a friendship that had become a lifeline, about the slow, careful way they might try to build something real, dinners that felt like dates, conversations that went deeper, touches that no longer carried hesitation. There were no grand declarations or movie-like kisses, just two people choosing with open eyes to step forward. When Ethan left that night, he paused at the door and took her hand, intentionally this time. The touch felt different, warm, promised. Not an accident, but a beginning. Claire closed the door behind him and leaned against it, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in months. The house still held its quiet, but it no longer felt quite so empty.